Well, around the 1950s, many African countries fought for independence. If you look at Ghana, for instance, a nation led by Kwame Nkrumah championed the fight against colonial rule and kicked against colonial powers from the shores of Ghana. We fought for independence. But before we fought for independence, there were so many factors that agitated our minds. Some were some we call militant factors, some we call factors that were not too much pushing or making us agitating for immediate self-governance. So the point is that at one point in time, African countries, African leaders just asked for reforms. The colonial government had excluded Africans from the governance process, and there were other challenges that Africans confronted or were faced with. And so these independent fighters asked for reforms. For instance, Africanization of the public service. The public service was dominated essentially by whites, and also if you look at their top echelons, they were all white people. And in the executive council, legislative council, Africans had limited or no representation at all, and so they were asking for reforms. But it got to some time in the late or early to mid 1950s. These African leaders were asking not for reforms. They were militant nationalists, and essentially they were asking that the colonial master be kicked away. So they fought for independence. There is a saying that be careful of what you ask for, because you may be given, and when you receive it, you may realize that what you are asking for may not be really what you truly like, or you may have a lot of problems, even though what you are asking for you may be given. So African leaders fought hard for independence. And I remember Kwame Nkrumah saying that when his attention was being drawn to the fact that we may not be ready as a people to govern ourselves as ourselves, and then it may be dangerous for us to be given independence, he said we prefer independence with danger to servitude in tranquility. We prefer independence with danger to servitude in tranquility. As in, you would rather govern yourself, have independence, and govern yourself regardless of the dangers that are there, than to be slaves and have a peace of mind. So he was able to mobilize Nkrumah and other independent fighters, Sekou Touré, Leopold Sedar Senghor, etc. They all fought for independence, and as well they were given. So we had independence. But what was the nature of most African social and political economy, the economies, most of the social and political economies of many African countries at the time of independence? It was problematic. For instance, at the time of independence, the economies of these African countries have been heavily integrated into the world economy, into the world or global economy, in an unequal terms, so that African countries were only producers of raw materials and importers of finished goods. They were producers of raw materials whose pricing they couldn't determine, and importers of finished goods from the developed countries whose pricing were already fixed. And this was seriously problematic. At the time of independence again, they saw that it was realized that there was limited investment in infrastructure. The infrastructure that were developed or were built only led to areas where raw materials were. So if there were roads, the roads connected the city centers to only where Kuku, for instance, was. If there were schools, they were built just to provide education for the wards of the colonial masters. So generally across the country and across the country, across the country of Ghana and in many other countries that were colonized, in terms of investment, there were a lot of limitations. They didn't have a lot of investment in infrastructure. And then also the structure of the economy of many of these African countries that had been given independence was weak. Agriculture at the time accounted for 60 to 90% jobs, for the people. So the point is about 60 to 90% of the population were into agriculture, not just serious agriculture, but they were into subsistence farming. In other developed countries, you have just about 3% of the population going into agriculture and being able to feed everybody and exporting products. But at the time of independence, 60% to 90% of our population were into subsistence farming, and they were not able to even feed themselves, let alone export that much. Also, we relied so much on foreign imports. So many people in the economy of these developing countries that had attained independence were relying more on foreign imports. And it's a basic economics that if you import more than you export, you have balance of payment deficit, and that portends trouble for you. And then also we depended so much, the people in these countries that had attained independence depended so much on foreign direct investment and foreign managerial techniques. So we're always expecting people to come and invest here. And in terms of who manages our affairs, who manages our public corporations and all that, we depended on foreigners. And so these are some of the features or some of the challenges that we found at that greeted us at the time of independence. So if you look at all of them, they speak to the fact that even though we fought for independence, we were given independence, and the economies of these countries that were given independence were severely underdeveloped. They were severely underdeveloped. And so the next time I talk about this course, I'll look at some of the theoretical explanations to our underdeveloped status, or the underdeveloped economies many African countries, inherited. Then that will set the tone for us to look at the various strategies that leaders put in place to attempt to surmount underdevelopment, our underdeveloped economies. And then we'll be in a position to tackle or to interrogate why these strategies have worked or why they have not worked. We'll be in a position to answer the question as to whether we are developed given these strategies that we have implemented, or we have not developed. And if we have not developed, then what are some of the explanatory variables that account for our underdevelopment in spite of the strategies that we have put in place or implemented as African countries since independence? I'll continue the next time.